Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. That music means the Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. And it's a really interesting day. All things Hillsdale, hillsdale.edu. All of our previous Hillsdale Dialogues collected at hughforhillsdale.com. 5 of those previous Hillsdale Dialogues have been about this book, The Republic of Plato, translated by Alan Bloom. And I've done those previous 5 segments with just Dr. Daniel O'Toole, Plato scholar, professor at Hillsdale College. Wonderful guest, wonderful expert. He's put up with my sluggard kind of scattered approach to Plato. But now for part 6, and then the next couple of weeks, part 7 and 8, Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, who's an avowed Aristotle man, is going to join us, apparently from an angle that's at 30,000 feet over his head. But it's a great angle, and it's great to have you both back. And I got to begin by saying, I've got 4 pages of notes on the second half of Book 3 and Book 4. I doubt we will get there, but I'm going to begin by asking a dangerous question. Dr. Arnn, I sent you the transcripts of Dr. O'Toole and my conversation on the Republic. What did you think?
Well, first of all, I've read them all. There's some beautiful things in it. You guys have done great. I'll say, first of all, that you're not ever going to be in a position to look down on me, Hugh Hewitt, which you just implied that you could. Second thing I'll say is...
that's sort of like Thrasymachus at the end of chapter 2 just leaves.
So
he's there.
Dan needs to be stricter with you. I can teach him to do that because you have actually said in these things that the founders were blind to slavery, and you got only a mild rebuke for that. But that, Hugh, is dog stupid.
It is. I had forgotten Cooper Union's speech. I'm sorry. I repent of that.
Well, yeah, all of that. I mean, they were.
Some dogs are very loyal, though. They can be very smart.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he's got philosophic dogs going on here.
Themselves.
I want to do one serious thing, and that is I want to rehearse a little bit about the conversation with Thrasymachus in the latter part of Book 1, because that's world historic conversation, in my opinion. It had an enormous effect on me. And the reasons are, I think there are 2 common sense things that we think about right and wrong. And both of them have a philosophic turn eventually. We're all concerned with the good. Everybody wants to know about it. That's what this book is about, right? And it's lively and it's intense and it's cataclysmic because of that. So there are 2 common sense things to think about it. One is we all know right and wrong. My mother used to say, well, we couldn't give them much, but we taught them right from wrong. And I can remember as a boy thinking, I'm not sure exactly when they did that. And that's because it's obvious. And the other is we just do what is in our interest. And so in my own life growing up, I had a very strong sense of right and wrong and not much ability to give an account of it. And I go off to college and I encounter what C.S. Lewis describes in The Abolition of Man, that great book. I'm going to do a podcast about that with Michael Ward this week.
Oh my.
And what happens in there? They teach you that everything is conventional and everything is just what you think. And that's very intoxicating to the young. And that's Thrasymachus' argument in a form. And it's intoxicating because you can know all about it in 15 minutes. And then you've got a pattern and you can apply it to every question that comes up. And I was forced into a course on Plato's Republic by the requirements of my major in undergraduate school, and I actually tried to get out of it. And then this very great man, Jeffrey Wallen, who's not teaching anymore, although he's alive and well, he inherited a lot of money and went to seed, is what I always say about him. But I went there to disrupt the class, thinking I knew too much for the class. And he destroyed me. It took him about 2 weeks. And he just asked this question one day. And I was arguing with him like crazy. He's very good, very good. He's a very talented teacher. Just spent his whole life in the classroom instead of on a yacht. An assertion about the good by implication. And he
not
said,
by implication, so, very well hidden. That's a very obvious implication.
Explication, yeah. He said to me, so you're not curious at all about what justice would be? And I said, you can't know. Which, by the way, is the opposite of an assertion that it's just a matter of power, but it turns out to be the same assertion. Let's say if you can't know, then make it up for yourself. And he said, you give that answer for everything, don't you? And I remember sitting back. It's the reason that I'm not a lawyer today. It's the reason, Hugh, that I don't think like you. Yep. And I stopped, right? And here's the point. In that conversation, you are welcomed into a world of taking things seriously. And it has an immediate and powerful and dramatic effect upon anyone who does it. Because now, all of a sudden, the world is real. And now you're going to start thinking about it. You're going to say, wowie, wonder what that means. And it changes one immediately and powerfully. And so, sure, Bloom makes this point in his introduction. Thrasymachus goes into that discussion hardly able to restrain himself. He says he trembling or rising up like a wild beast. I remember the Greek word, therion. He was very excited. Why? Because it just sounded too pat and pious to him. Dan does a very good job with that, see? No, this is serious, Socrates. We want to teach these young men to get on. And you know, the will to power, see. I have a freshman this year, very rare. I've adopted him. He's ambivalent about the college. And he's very personable, sweet, cooperative young man. But he says, it's very Christian, isn't it? And I said, you didn't know that. And he said, well, I did know. And I said, and what are you? Apparently not that. And he said, I like Friedrich Nietzsche.
You told me.
And young people pick that, see? And men especially, because young men are suppressed today. And they're looking for a way to be a man. And Thrasymachus, who makes his money from people like Glaucon and Adiamachus, Dan does a very good job with all that. It's very dramatic, this thing, see? And remember, it's so important that these are Plato's brothers. Yeah. And this is Plato's teacher. And Thrasymachus is Plato's competitor for the soul of young men. And he's teaching them. Assert yourself. Get what you want. And Socrates proves to him, decisive thing that happens. It actually trails off a little bit. You know, it's a little unclear exactly what's established there with Thrasymachus. But that hides the extremely powerful thing that is established, and that is, that argument is banished.
One of the things that Dr. O'Toole did impress on me in the discussion, we took 3 weeks on book one, and Dr. O'Toole, I believe you impressed on me that Socrates was afraid of Thrasymachus, or pretended to be afraid of Thrasymachus. I can't remember.
I think he's exactly right. I mean, in a sense, I think Socrates wants to provoke Thrasymachus Socrates knows that these young men, these intelligent young men, are spending time with Thrasymachus and those like him.
Stop right there, Professor. We got to go to break. I want to remind everyone, this is part of an ongoing series on the Republic, and it's this edition of it, The Republic of Plato, Alan Bloom. It's the second edition. Go and get it from Amazon. He's the translator. If you want to listen to episodes 1 through 5, before Dr. Arnn joined the fray, along with Professor O'Toole, go to hughforhillsdale.com. If you want all things Hillsdale, you go to hillsdale.edu. If you want Imprimus, the newsletter, and millions of you do, it's free, delivered in the old-fashioned snail mail. Go to hillsdale.edu and sign up for Imprimus, watch their video courses, and come right back.
Hey there. Today I want to tell you about the Hillsdale K-12 Classical Education Podcast. This unique show explains how children benefit from an American classical education. Whether you're a teacher, student, or parent, you'll find something of value on the show. You'll hear from teachers and administrators from schools around the country, as well as Hillsdale professors and friends who are leading the effort to revive the American tradition of K-12 education. When you listen, you'll learn all about classical education, what it is, how to teach it, and why it matters today. And there are dozens of back episodes on specific topics, like teaching Singapore math, reading great books, and even understanding how athletics is critical to a child's development. Listen every Monday on podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway this week with Dr. Larry Arnn and Dr. Daniel O'Toole. And we're talking about, of course, Plato's Republic. And Dr. O'Toole, you were saying something that they know. What was it?
He knows that Thrasymachus is an intoxicating and compelling teacher, partly because he's promising, look, I can show you how the real world works. You're not going to be a dupe and naive anymore. And I can equip you with the skills, especially rhetoric, which can sway people to give you power. And you can dupe them and you can trick them. And so he promises them a sort of expertise. And of course, he promises them what's truly good, and a good that allows them to see through the lies that others are duped by. So, yes, Socrates wants to provoke that combat and that fight with Thrasymachus.
And Professor O'Toole,
yeah.
If you had been in a room with Dr. Arnn and with me when you were making your decision on whether or not to pursue a PhD, Dr. Arnn would have argued, pursue your PhD, and I would have argued, go to law school. And I would have argued, go to law school for a very simple reason. Unless you want to be penurious and without influence in the United States, avoid the academy. And I've talked so many people into law school and out of PhDs. Now I'm talking them out of law school. But how would you have reacted? Did anyone make that argument to you that law school was actually a better choice, the one that Dr. Arnn did not make?
No. Well, early on in college, I did have a professor who just made a very helpful point. He said, look, if you want to go to law school, you better want to be a lawyer. In other words, there's a lot of drudgery, and it's a lot of hard work both in law school, and a lot of lawyers do, he didn't say this, but one can figure it out, a lot of not just petty, but even corrupt things. And so, an ambitious person might decide that's not really for me. Now, what I say to students is, look, it's you have to really want to do that work, and you have to enjoy the careful work of going through the law. You have to like that. But if you do, it's a good career, and it's a necessary career because there are so many evil and bad lawyers in our world. The good guys need someone on their side. I will say, we're going to talk about this later, but, it's not healthy to have a regime consumed by lawfare as ours is. And that's actually a thing that comes out here in the Republic.
It does. There's a lot. I have a lot of notes on judges and lawyers and that, but I want to ask Dr. Arnn before we move on, why were you going to go to law school before you studied the Republic? What did you think it would give you?
Well, it's an argument about the kinds of souls, right? I only met Dan after he'd become hooked on what he's hooked on.
Yeah.
And so it didn't come up. and he was still a kid, by the way. He's still a kid today. But my advice varies depending on the person.
Yeah.
And the ones I tell to go to graduate school, because it is impractical, by the way, to go to graduate school.
Extremely.
Is to advise a young person, you think about their capacities. I'm living in a world, Dan and I are living in a world where everybody's pretty smart. Everybody can go to law school, or most everybody can go to graduate school if they want to. I try to give advice based on what they want. What do they want? And, there's a kind, like the ones who go to law school, they're interested in governing. They're interested in rule. And that's a noble thing. It's a kind of soul. It's in this book. And with them, I caution them, remember to learn. I caution everybody that, right? Yeah. Because you'll become what Athens was becoming at the time of Socrates, against which this book is an argument. You'll become a sophist. You'll become a seeker after power.
Yeah.
And so with Dan is this kind. See, he's very much this kind. It just can't be too complicated for him. He hasn't. He likes it, and he hasn't shown me his dissertation. Although one of these days I'm going to demand it.
You haven't seen it? I'll send you my dissertation.
It's got to be 15 times longer than the dialogue about which he wrote, and the dialogue itself is very intricate, right?
Very intricate indeed, but don't go anywhere. We're going to come back and talk about just how intricate. Hillsdale.edu for everything. All of the prior dialogues in this series, HughForHillsdale.com. HughForHillsdale.com. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. Hillsdale Dialogue underway. I'm Hugh Hewitt, Hillsdale.edu, where you get them all. HughForHillsdale.com for all the dialogue. Dr. Arnn, you were saying about Professor O'Toole?
Well, he just got in there, and he's like one of these horses in the jumping championships, the ones who can jump the best. Sometimes they balk at the gate, they just, they go like, I'm going to go really high here, and I don't want to finish. So he's like he always has an emergency at the end. And the reason is it's not perfect yet. And so that's Dan, right? And meeting Dan, by the time I met him, all this was apparent because some wise people had worked on him and he had worked on himself. Yeah, he should go to graduate school.
Now, I have two diversions. I'm going to get both of them out of the way.
Thank you.
The first diversion is Plutarch's chapter on Alcibiades, which I listened to last night by happenstance. He's a bad man who's very interesting. And the second diversion is Douglas K. Murray, who I've never met, and they're separated by about 2,500 years. Douglas K. Murray is an Oxford graduate who was interviewed by Dan Senor this week on the Call Me Back podcast, and he stated bluntly at one point, if you want your child to be a good person, don't let them go to the Ivy League. Quote, end quote. If you want your child to be a good person, don't let them go to the Ivy League. Why do you think, and Douglas Murray, who I do not know and greatly admire, is adamant about this? Do you agree with that, Dr. Arnn?
Well, with the important reservation, the main one is never underestimate the power of human nature. And that means, I just said, my advice to the young is to figure out what do they love. And they have nations, they have natures. And then you try to help them improve what they love. And, there are 3 or 4, well, there are 10. I've had 10 students in class who've been clerks on the Supreme Court. One of them's on the Yale Law School faculty now. And I'm proud to say that those are young people of very high mind, soul. And they're not going to be ruined by being a lawyer, and one needn't be. And the right kind of soul is not.
They went to graduate school. They went to graduate school at the Ivies, not undergraduate. Yeah, graduate school can't hurt you.
Yeah, that's right. And you do need, but just remember, you don't want. I mean, remember, we live in the age where the only thing we can think about is us and what we do to people, and you can't work with people very well if you have that outlook, right? Because people make themselves very extensively, and they need some help, but it's important if they get it or not. But,
and Dan, to the question about Alcibiades, is he Thrasymachus? Is that what happens when Thrasymachus gets a hold of a student?
I think so, but more glorious. And see, I'll make 2 points about that. One is, you can't, my opinion is, it's just delicious to read Xenophon on Alcibiades.
Oh, I've never done that.
Xenophon was Socrates' student who was a practical man. See, he was a ruler, statesman, a warrior, a general, and a philosopher. And that's nigh unique. It might be unique. Cicero was not such a warrior.
He's a coward.
Well, we don't know that, but
not in terms of statesmanship, but in terms of the biographies I've read of Cicero, is he hated military service and he did not like to be in danger, physical danger, and he ran when he had to run.
A difference from Socrates that Dan points out. But it takes a man like Xenophon to look down properly on Alcibiades. Again, he does a very good job of it. Whereas Plato is gentler. And Plato himself was no coward. So, yeah, that's one point. Another point is we get into Homer, and I had forgotten this, but there's an analysis of Homer. There are
oh my goodness, line by line. I'd forgotten it too.
And see, and taking on Thrasymachus and taking on Homer and Achilles are the same task in this book. Because
I gotta say, by the way, Professor O'Toole is obviously living the Republic right now. Because one of the instructions that Socrates gives is that younger men ought to remain silent in the company of older men. So you're not saying anything, Professor O'Toole, and you're not interrupting, so you must have a well-formed soul.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Well, I will.
Yeah, no, because see, all this stuff about the Achilles is the archetype of a Greek, right? And Achilles was run away with himself a lot. And Achilles was arbitrary. And Achilles, couldn't control his temper, too proud. Compare him to Odysseus in the Iliad. Odysseus is wily and puts things back together. He can rule better than Achilles does. And Achilles is great because he's the greatest of all the warriors.
Yeah.
But also he's out of control. And, he chooses eternal glory over domestic happiness, I guess, normal happiness. Yeah. And Socrates wants to banish that. And what you have to see is that leads nowhere good, right? That thing. And it, ultimately it was the destruction of Athens and Sparta too. And
so, Professor O'Toole,
for a different reason.
You've been very deferential. You had the first 5 hours, of course. The floor is yours. What do you make of what Dr. Arnn has said to date?
Well, I mean, I fully agree. I think, Achilles is the model for the Greeks, and it turns out he's a very problematic model. I mean, one has to say there are incredible virtues. I mean, in a way, his anger and frustration in the Iliad is that he's not appropriately honored because, in fact, he is the best warrior. In a way, he is the natural ruler, and he's not being treated as such. But yeah, I agree with my father-in-law. I mean, Achilles rages against the world, and he rages against natural limits, and his longing for glory takes him out of control. And it makes him excessively violent. I mean, it's brutal even to the Greeks to see something like Achilles dragging the corpse of his rival around and around. So there's something totally uncontrolled about a man who can't accept the natural limits of things. And that means especially the mortality of his loved ones and himself, the fact that those who are best aren't simply honored and respected in the world. And I think what Socrates seeks to do is to educate and moderate that noble kind of soul and that spirit. You can't eliminate it, nor can you simply make it into a philosopher. What you can do is you can try to forge an alliance of the thinkers, the philosophers, and noble-minded men. And the Republic is the greatest experiment of that, where, you know, the focus is on the elites, men like Glaucon, and it's on getting them to devote themselves fully to the city, but also in educating them, and also that turns out making them more like the philosopher, more rational, more self-controlled, more moderate and disciplined, more accepting of the nature of things. And if I can say one other thing about this, Alcibiades is an interesting case or example of this. What both Plato and Xenophon show is that Socrates was deeply interested in Alcibiades. And just for this obvious reason, he was awesome. I mean, one thing Xenophon and Thucydides show you is he is absolutely one of the most daring and impressive and intelligent generals in the Greek world. I mean, he fought for every side because everyone wanted him to fight for their side. Alcibiades is ambitious and open.
He's from Athens. For the benefit of the Steelers fans, he's from Athens. He ends up fighting for Sparta's side. He ends up fighting for Persia. There's a novel, if you don't want to do the hard work of Plutarch, there's a novel called The Prince of Tides by Stephen Pressfield, which will help you. But Plutarch is really what you ought to go to. With that background, warrior, statesman, treasonous bastard. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, ultimately a traitor. And part of the reason they executed Socrates was because of his association, above all, with Alcibiades and Critias. Critias, much nastier, a tyrant who, a member of Plato's family, and he tries to institute a kind of, to speak somewhat anachronistically, a kind of fascist oligarchy. Anyway, Socrates is
stop. I did not know that Socrates was executed or took poison because of Alcibiades. I can't pronounce his name. I didn't know that was it, or the other guy. I didn't know that. That's remarkable.
Sorry, I couldn't remember if we talked about this a little bit. It's in the background, I would say, of the Republic. That the official charges were his impiety and corrupting the youth. But the principal examples of the youth who were potentially corrupted were Alcibiades and Critias.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, you should. This is my father-in-law's recommending Xenophon. Xenophon brings this out very nicely at the beginning of his book, The Memorabilia, his recollections of Socrates. But it's Plato writes dialogues about Critias and Alcibiades as well, and he shows that they both learned, or you could say mislearned, things from Socrates. They learned a kind of contempt for democracy. Critias kind of thought, I can be a philosopher king or a wise ruler and put down all my enemies and do the purges that other people aren't willing to do.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. What a great dialogue today. Having fun with Dr. Arnn and Dr. O'Toole, but we got to get back. We got to figure out what is going on here, Professor O'Toole. To you.
Alcibiades, it's a more interesting case. It's like if Glaucon, had kind of failed. Alcibiades is ambitious, and Socrates draws out of him a longing not just to dominate, but to rule justly, which is what every truly ambitious man wants to do. Even the greatest, empire builders want to be honored and honored for a reason, that they actually benefit their people. I think the problem that Alcibiades kind of recognizes in himself is he couldn't resist the charms of the love of the many, the charms of honor and praise that attend rule and domination and empire building. And he couldn't resist those charms, especially when he wasn't around Socrates. And so he kind of saw that he couldn't become a truly self-controlled or rational person the way, in a sense, he hoped in the way certainly Socrates hoped.
Because it takes us immediately to the present and to the people who want to rule. And maybe the Plato will help us understand who ought to be picked from among them. I'm going to go back to you with that, Dr. Arnn. Is that, in fact, any help to us in picking rulers, what we learn about rulers in the Republic?
Well, to answer that question, I have to say something prospectively now about where we're going in this book. The first and obvious caution in the book is against runaway self-interest and appetite. Both Thrasymachus and Achilles and Alcibiades are all guilty of that. By the way, it's probably Alcibiades, but my Hungarian brother-in-law, now deceased and a very great man, was a Hungarian, and he always said Alcibiades, so I can't get that out of my head. But you're a creature of your
teacher. It's the simplest way to say it. It's not
Alcibiades,
following the Greek, but it's the best way.
Yeah, so that's what they were, right? Runaway ambition, liberate it, let it go. The will to power. My student that I've adopted, I'm going to beat that out of him by Christmas time. And he's a very good-natured kid. I think it'll be possible. But the second problem is what much of the rest of the book is about. And that is, once you teach a young man or woman, very ambitious, once you teach them that things can be figured out and you got to get to work on it, then, of course, there's the impulse not just to figure everything out, but to implement what you figured out.
Yeah.
And so this book goes very far in that direction. The destruction of the family, communism, absolute rule, right? And it breaks down. And the point is, Athens, the immediate problem of Athens, it's apparent in Pericles' funeral oration, where he basically said something that you can't find Winston Churchill ever saying, and that is, we cannot lose this war. You see, and Churchill's very different from Pericles, because in his view, we cannot lose this war ultimately because our cause is the right one, and we are prepared to die for it. And
well, let me throw a little Leo Strauss at both of you. Leo Strauss said the West would never be in danger unless it lost sight. He wrote this in City and Man, the introduction, unless it lost sight of what it was about. And so we can lose the war if we lose sight, the war being between good and evil, if the West loses sight of what it is about. And I think we're actually dancing on that cliff right now. Professor O'Toole, I don't want to be... Go ahead, Dr. Arnn. Go ahead.
Hold on, I got to finish. He's not time for the son-in-law yet. And if you add that second thing, runaway idealism, that's what we've got today. We haven't just lost sight of the American Revolution. Our actual view of it in the elite, right, and the people who are in power, is that it was a good start, but it's insufficient, and we can perfect it. And so equality now means everybody the same, and we can make it so. And we are the prophets. We are the wise. Prophet is the wrong word. They don't eschew words like that. But we are the enlightened and wise, and we should rule. And we have to manage the society. And if we manage it right, then we can make it perfect. And here on Earth, right? And that's what's at stake in this election, in my opinion. The American Revolution differs from current doctrine in its moderation. And this, in other words, if you look at reality, you will see that human beings are not dogs, and you will see that they are not gods. And Thrasymachus' argument taken to its extreme would make us like really noble, assertive dogs.
I thought so. I thought so too, and that's the perfect place to go to the second half of Book 3. And 2 next week. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to bring back Dr. Arnn and Dr. O'Toole next week, except to hillsdale.edu. All things Hillsdale are there. Or to hughforhillsdale.com for parts 1 through 5 in this series on the Republic. Remember, it's Alan Bloom's translation. hughforhillsdale.com. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Harley. Thank you, Dwayne. I'm Hugh Hewitt.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.